Hello everyone, and welcome to the second session in Cambashi's 2014 webinar series on quantified or evidence-based marketing planning. I'm Tony Christian, and joining me is my colleague Peter Thorne. Before we go any further, we should probably just explain again what the term marketing planning means to us at Cambashi. I'm sure we're all familiar with many tools and techniques to support the development of a company's high-level strategy, but it's probably stating the obvious to say that the success of any strategy depends on how effectively it can be translated into and aligned with the many and varied targets and activities of the staff throughout the organisation. So it's the set of processes that it seeks to achieve that alignment. That's what we call marketing planning. Well, despite its importance, there are far fewer tools to help with the marketing planning side of things, and this series of webinars sets out to demonstrate how it can be approached in a way that's based on the use of comprehensive, multi-perspective market data to provide a sound planning framework. The benefits that flow from this are not limited to achieving the essential alignment between strategy and activity, but they also include the ability to expose the reasoning and therefore gain buy-in to the plan throughout the company. Now, as an analyst firm, Cambashi's focus is on the $17 billion worldwide market for technical software applications, and we certainly regard that as being at the difficult end of the marketing planning spectrum, given that it spans almost all parts of the world, covers a huge number of industries, and includes a huge number of products for a wide range of activities. However, it's a market in which data-driven analysis is being used to great benefit by business planners all over the world. In this webinar series, we're looking at a range of marketing planning scenarios, and our first session back in late March focused on a hypothetical US-based software provider that was successful selling into high-tech industries in the US and Japan, but the management team had asked where next. We used the different perspectives provided by the Cambashi market observatories to filter the wide spectrum of potential markets down to those likely to be most attractive, and then to develop an initial picture of those market opportunities, not only in terms of size, but also the likely match between market characteristics and the company's value proposition. If you would like to access the recording of that first session, please let us know and we'll be happy to provide the link. Now, in this second session, we're going to look at the scenario of a forthcoming meeting between a chief marketing officer and the company's regional heads. That is, the business leaders responsible for sales in each of the Americas, EMEA and APAC, to discuss the business targets for the coming year and also the potential longer-term initiatives that should be considered for each region. The CMO has asked one of his marketing executives to prepare a briefing document to provide the framework for those discussions. This is where I'll bring Peter in, because we're going to ask him to take on the role of that marketing executive. So Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to be using data from Cambashi's market observatories. So first I'll explain what these are, then I'll explain the scenario that we'll be looking at, then we'll use the market observatory data to answer the questions that come up in the scenario. So, the Cambashi market observatories, these are data sets delivered as Excel spreadsheets. We research the market from different points of view, and the observatories provide consistent data for these multiple views of the market. The observatories fit into three groups. Technical application software at the top here is our core domain. In the middle group, we maintain observatories covering economic data, which helps set context and judge potential markets. Thirdly, in the bottom group, we treat specific areas as focused markets. So, technical applications. This is the name we use for the set of application software tools used by engineers and designers. This is CAD, CAM, CAE, PLM. Also the apps used for architecture, engineering and construction, such as BIM, Building Information Management. We also include geographic information application, also applications used by creative professionals for industrial and other design tasks. But some things are excluded. Tools used for software and semiconductor development are excluded. We handle them separately. We also exclude plant floor software. So our definition of tech apps focuses on product development and just borders into production. We include manufacturing process planning, but we exclude operations management. The four tech apps observatories provide different views of the market. 3 of them mainly depend on independent data sources. That's product, country, and industry. The 4th, provided by industry, adds some additional research to enable us to combine the others. The employment and value-added observatories are structured to provide detail of economic conditions and employment, specifically in the industry segments that invest in technical application software. And for the last 5 years or so, we've been quantifying the growing use of systems engineering and software development tools. These tools are more and more important for development of just about every product with an on-off switch. At the moment, the overlap between these providers and the providers in our Tech Apps domain is important but relatively small. This overlap is growing, but for now we research and deliver this data separately. We use the multiple data sources to triangulate and improve the data. It's an iterative refine, constrain and converge process. The result is consistent data and multiple views. Today we're going to be using data from 4 observatories, these 4: product, industry, employment and value added. So let's have a look at the scenario. Today I have marketing planning responsibilities for a business called Imaginary Software. Imaginary is a global provider selling into architecture and construction. As Tony mentioned, there's going to be a meeting between the CMO of Imaginary and the 3 regional heads, the heads for Americas, APAC and EMEA. They'll be setting and agreeing and discussing targets for next year, and my job will be to provide information for this meeting. You can see the detailed request I got from the CMO for this meeting. Bring some numbers with you. I think this is typical, but he did at least mention performance, market opportunity and competitors. But the thing is, I'm going to need numbers which I can explain and which will stand up to the scrutiny of these senior people, who obviously in this kind of meeting will feel the heat of the spotlight on them. I'll be using Cambashi Market Observatory data for market opportunity information. And I'll also put together a hypothetical data set of revenues for Imaginary, which, as you can tell by the name, is fictitious. Its performance data has nothing to do with any existing business. So I need to keep the lawyers happy with a disclaimer. The purpose of the data here is only to illustrate the scenario. The numbers are Cambashi estimates, and of course the observatories are changing and developing all the time. Right, this slide is to remind me to change applications because I want to start with an overview. We're dealing with a global business and I'd like to look at country information on a map. Google Earth is a vehicle for this. This slide is just a snapshot from Google Earth. I'll switch applications so we can look at the live version of Google Earth, but I'll be switching back in a couple of minutes. There's a technology health warning here. When we checked this out, the live version was okay, but if you're watching the recording, we may not yet have solved some frame rate questions. So I will just switch applications here. So I'm going to drop out of PowerPoint and I'm going to switch on Google Earth. Now, what we're looking at here is economic data from the Value Added Observatory. What we've done is select for one sector the value-added data. So the sector we've chosen is architecture, engineering and construction. In order to define architecture, engineering and construction, as I'll explain later, we actually have to choose a number of lower-level sectors. But what we've done is aggregate those lower-level sectors to make an AEC sector, which we think is appropriate, I think is appropriate for Imaginary, and we've then calculated the growth. We've used local currencies for this growth calculation. Obviously, this reflects local conditions and local perceptions of the state of the market. And the way the results are presented is with a colour for each country. The cold colours, that's the greens and the blues, these are negative growth, and the warm colours, yellows, oranges and red, this is positive growth. The Google Earth software and the Google Earth format of observatory data are not part of the observatory deliverable from Cambashi, but we can show licensees how to do this using free software and web services. So, if the internet bandwidth allowed, you'd see smoothly rotating images, but I've set things up to jump from one place to another, so you'll have to imagine the smooth rotation of the Earth. So we could focus on the Americas. Here they are, and you can see a lack of growth in North America and a positive growth in South America. We can look at Asia Pacific. Here it is. And here you can see essentially the warm colors, with the exception of Thailand here, we've got India and China and Indonesia, and just on the edge there, Australia, showing the warm colors of growth. Japan also showing a negative growth. And then back to Europe. And here you can see, a lot of cold colors. We can scroll, in this particular data set, we've got a number of years loaded, so we can scroll through, and you can see at the moment we're looking at 2009. So if I drag this slider forward, you can see 2010, bit of an improvement in Europe, as I expect those of us here remember. 2011, clearly still some problems in the AEC sector in Southern Europe. 2012, and 2013, and 2014. And by then, everything is looking more positive. So if I go forward to 2015, generally positive forecasts. For the meeting with CMO, this kind of visualization can act as an icebreaker and also help to get people interested. This particular data is about customers. It's construction activity, not software. And it also shows the big picture of the economy. It's not the total GDP, which of course is in newspapers. This is just AEC, so it's focused on the area that we're interested in. And we can get an a quick view of each region. I mean, I've set the slider to 2015, so let's see. What do the Americas look like? Oh, generally really quite warm, okay in North America, and actually a hot spot down in Argentina, in South America. But an overall impression of warmth. If I go to APAC, well, even stronger. Red quite a bright red in India, strong growth, and a brighter orange in China, very positive. Go back to Europe, and okay, slightly more muted, but still showing growth. So you can start the meeting with a kind of overview, an instant visual representation of what you might expect for the rest of the meeting. Okay, so let me go back to PowerPoint. So there we go, and move on. So, having set the scene and hopefully got the top team talking and interested in the data, we really need to get specific. So for the first view, I'm going to use products as my market reference. I'm going to extract data from the Cambashi Product Observatory. The Product Observatory analyzes software revenues for 64 product lines from 28 vendors. I'm going to select product lines from 5 vendors, which the imaginary management team consider as competitors. So here are the 5 from the 28 in the Product Observatory: Autodesk, Bentley, Fukui, Nemetschek, and RIB. But not all their product lines compete with imaginary. On the right-hand side of this table, you can see the product group categories available in the Product Observatory for each of these providers. There are 9 categories for Autodesk, 4 for Bentley, 3 for Fukui, 6 for Nemetschek, and 3 for RIB. So of these 25 categories for these 5 vendors, just 11 compete for the same business as imaginary. We're going to select just these product groups, and they're the ones that are shown in bold here. I should say we sometimes use the provider's name for a product, in which case, of course, we acknowledge their rights to the name. Sometimes we group products together and use our own descriptive name. So by doing that, we've chosen the product lines we need, and I've summarized them here just by count. Next, we're going to need to choose revenue types. I'm interested in total software, so I will include new licenses and maintenance or subscription fees, and I will exclude professional services and other revenues. Next, we need to look at regions. Of course, for this region, we want all 3 regions. And I'm going to select 4 of the available 9 years. I don't want too much history or too much of the future. And finally, we're going to work in US dollars. To create the charts that we're going to look at, I've used Excel pivot tables to select aggregate and summarize the observatory data, then used these pivot tables to create the charts. You don't have to use Excel, of course. You can move the data into any business intelligence system. So, here are the software revenues for the 11 product groups from 5 providers over the 4 years we're looking at. Of course, it's not total revenues here, it's software revenues, so excluding professional services and other revenue. And it's just the selected product lines, not all products. And I should also point out it's not end-user expenditure. The software revenues in the product observatory exclude channel margin and reseller services and so on. So this chart is the aggregated worldwide software revenue for the selected product lines measured in US dollars. But these software revenue numbers are not the first focus for the target setting meeting. What the meeting really wants to do is look at the regional spread of business. This is the same data, but this time grouped by region rather than by provider. The vertical axis here is a percentage. It's the spend in the region on the selected products as a share of the worldwide total. As you can see, the combined geographic distribution of the product lines we've selected is really quite stable, but there are some small trends. EMEA, which are the blue bars on the left of each group, looks as if it's just becoming a smaller part of the total business. APAC, the green bars on the right, is just about level, maybe a small reduction, and the Americas geo is gaining share. These are the red bars in the middle. So this is a basis for the first comparison. This is what the benchmark companies have achieved and will achieve with the selected product lines. Using this data is a bit like using the sales teams of these companies as our market researchers. I'm going to compare Imaginary's revenues in EMEA, Americas and APAC with this baseline. This is the same data as the previous slide, but I've created one bar chart for each region. The red blocks are the same regional share data. They show the combined regional share for the 11 competitive product lines. I've added in the equivalent data for Imaginary, shown with the blue boxes. There's a story behind the pattern here. The Imaginary company started in EMEA in 2000. From 2000 to 2007, so that's before the start of these charts, all its revenue was in EMEA. So the blue outline would have shown 100% EMEA, 0 elsewhere. The founders saw opportunity in the US and moved there around 2007. And in the years up to 2012 had fantastic success. You can see the results. By 2012, they had grown Imaginary's US business so that it was a larger share of Imaginary's total than the benchmark products we've selected. But there's no surprise there, because up to 2011, there was no activity in APAC. In 2011, part of the top team moved to APAC to get the business started. Here are the results. Imaginary's APAC revenues have been growing fast and increasing as a proportion of total Imaginary revenue. If you look at the 2015 comparison, you can see that Imaginary's business will be as global as its competition. If Imaginary has substantial market share, say 35% or more, then Imaginary probably should take account of this in its marketing plans. Pushing on from 35% of the market needs different tactics. But if Imaginary has smaller market share, then the external market is not a constraint. Regional performance will depend on its products and sales, and will depend on its products and also on its sales and marketing effectiveness. But whatever the market share, it's clear the departure of the top team from the Americas has had an impact on the regional balance. You can see here that in the US, Imaginary has moved from above the benchmark set by the selected products to below this line. Given the history, one option to think about is going to be moving some of the top team back from APAC. Of course, these are just regional share figures. They don't say whether the total spend on the products we've selected as our benchmark is growing or declining. So I'm going to drill down into 2015 to find out. This chart shows 2015 year-on-year growth by region for our aggregated benchmark products. Worldwide growth is 5.6%. So even though both APAC and EMEA are growing, they're losing share to the Americas. For the meeting with the regional heads, this chart could have a significant influence on target setting. It shows the growth the competition are achieving with the selected product lines. Imaginary's objective, as you can imagine, is to gain market share. So the EMEA team need to beat 3.9% growth, but the Americas team must beat 7.3% or better. That's nearly double the EMEA figure. The APAC team must get above 5.4%. If you gave each region the target of growing at better than the global figure of 5.6%, then you'd be offering the Americas team a walk in the park, whereas the EMEA team would be facing a serious challenge. But since I'm going to be meeting with individuals whose personal goals and bonuses may be set based on these figures, I don't want to base my numbers on just one source. These numbers come from the Cambashi Product Observatory. Now I'm going to look at the Industry Observatory. So, the Industry Observatory, this looks at the whole market, not just selected products. It analyzes end-user expenditure on technical application software in 60 countries and 112 vertical market segments. I'm going to have to aggregate countries into the 3 regions to get comparable data. I'm going to have to select from the 112 verticals to get to the AEC sector, and I'm going to select the same 4 years. And of course, I'm going to work in US dollars so I get something comparative. So let's do that filtering using the pivot tables, drawing the chart, and here's the result. In the yellow box, you can see the 13 verticals that I've chosen from the 112 to set the scope for Imaginary's AEC market. The blue bar for each of these shows 2015 end-user expenditure on technical applications. This is a broader scope than the 11 product lines we looked at before, our competitors. This is helpful. If there are differences in the growth pattern for this broader market, then our offer, along with that of our competitors, is either growing or falling in importance compared to the other technical applications used in AEC verticals. So, the total for tech apps in AEC is over $4.5 billion. And when you look at the spend distribution, you can see that most of it is by firms in service and consultancy sectors. Anyway, back to target setting. Here's the same technical application spend data shown by growth measured in US dollars in each region in 2015. This is the way that we looked at our selected providers. Let's add them back in. Here they are. The numbers in red on the left for each region, these are the software revenue growth figures for the benchmark set. Remember, this was the set of 11 product lines selected from Autodesk, Bentley, Fukui, Nemetschek, and RIB. The numbers in blue on the right for each region are the growth of tech apps end-user expenditure by companies in the AEC sector. The AEC sector is a major market for the benchmark product lines, but in reality, these are also sold into other sectors as well. And of course, the AEC sector buys the benchmark products, but also buys a lot of other tech app software. So we're looking at an overlapping footprint of 2 independent views of the market. So you can see, worldwide, the selected providers are growing faster in 2015 than the AEC sector as a whole, 5.6% versus 4.4%. But this difference isn't uniform around the world. In EMEA, the difference is negligible. If we look at the Americas, there's a difference of 1.2%, from 6.1 to 7.3%. And in APAC, this difference is 1.7%. For the meeting with the regional heads, this is going to help put the 2015 growth figures in context. Depending on which way they want to argue, they may regard the selected product lines as unrepresentative because it's too narrow, different technology, different sales cycle, different decision makers, and they may regard the growth of the broader technical applications as similarly unrepresentative because it's too broad. I don't know, but I would anticipate and expect that the CMO will choose to use these 2 views as upper and lower bounds of what to expect if Imaginary simply follows the market. So, where are we? I'm getting close. Let's quickly recap. Firstly, we set the scene using a Google Earth view of value-added information for the AEC sector. Then we looked at regional distribution and growth for 11 competitor product lines from 5 selected competitors. Then next, to look at the market from a different point of view, we looked at the overall AEC sector spend and growth. And we put those together in order to create what may be the most significant slide for this target setting meeting, the region by region growth comparison between the competition and the AEC sector tech app spend. I'd like to add one more view. So Tony, I must ask you for guidance here. How are we doing for time? Can we have a quick look at employment data?
Well, we've got a few minutes left, Peter, and I think that would certainly be a very useful additional perspective. So yeah, sure, go ahead.
Good, thanks. So I'm going to use the Cambashi Employment Observatory. This provides employment data using the same 112 vertical market sectors that we looked at before, and it covers 121 occupations in 55 countries in these sectors. So that's about 2.3 billion employed people. I can pick out the same 13 verticals so that I'm looking at the same AEC sector as before. Total employment, as you can see, is over 208 million. But when you look at the occupations down the left-hand side, you can see that really quite a high proportion of these people are in trade and non-technical worker categories. For Imaginary, this represents opportunity for the future. But right now, the focus is on professional engineers. This is the group Imaginary believes are the influencers and decision makers. You can see them here, second bar down. If you read off the scale, it's about 8 million people in AEC worldwide, just 4% of the total. So let's drill down. So this view from the Employment Observatory is of the professional engineers in AEC in a bit more detail. Down the left-hand side, you can see that there's data on 16 different engineering disciplines. The total, as I said, about 8 million professional engineers, and no real surprise that the majority, this group at the top, are civil engineers. But this range of types of professional engineer can be a good trigger for discussions. The CMO may want to think about in what way does Imaginary's offer address the needs of each of these groups. And you can get quite a discussion going about sales and marketing, focus, decision-making, and so on, which can be useful for these senior people. Right now, Imaginary believes that very often the key person in an account who tends to be on their side has an architect job title. So the distribution of the 1.3 million or so people classified as engineers architects, that's the second bar down on this chart, could be interesting. So let's look at this group. Here they are. Also from the Employment Observatory, it locates where these people are, and you can see the countries where you will find the 1.3 million professionals in the occupation category, engineers, architects in the AEC sector. The vertical axis is the count of employed people, and each blue bar is the number for an individual country. We have the Americas countries on the left, APAC countries in the middle, then EMEA on the right. By headcount, China, India, and Russia, China, India, Russia, and Japan lead the way. It's interesting that Japan has more architectural engineers than the US, and potentially understandable. Not much land area, earthquakes, together it probably means more work for architects. And the rules in Japan say that architects must supervise construction, but Russia has even more. So a headcount is no substitute for revenue numbers. But the point is, if you're seeking some view of total potential market and how much future opportunity there is for your software in the world, employment figures give you a handle. So I'd encourage the use of these numbers as a starting point for people who understand the market to discuss the longer-term future opportunity. And that's about it. That's the last of the 5 sets of numbers I'm planning to take to the meeting. Economy, competitors, AEC industry, 2 views of growth by region, and a view of employment to help guide future vision. That's it. I think I will be able to help them get maximum value from the meeting. Tony, back to you.
Thanks, Peter. So, while there will of course be a wide range of further research and analysis involved in a planning exercise like this, by using the data for, a little under half an hour or so, we've achieved a pretty sound framework for the discussions with the regional heads. In addition to the relative market sizes and forecast growths, we've gained some insight into the shape of the market for each region to support the setting of sales targets, but we've also picked up some points for discussion with our regional leaders about what it might take to exploit longer-term opportunities in their markets in terms of things like value proposition and even some early thoughts on sales approach, marketing priorities and possibly future product requirements. Well, we're at the end of the allotted time for the session, but so those that have to leave us here, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you'll join us next time. for those that can stay with us for a few minutes, we've actually had a number of questions pop up in our chat panel, so it might be useful just to overrun by a few minutes and address a few of these. We won't be able to do them all, but we will respond to all questions by email. But let's pick a few of these up, Peter, just it might be useful. I mean, the first one actually is a question on something that you are pretty enthusiastic about, so let me read it out. Your visuals using Google Earth looked like a great way to present a high-level view of market data. Can you do that with all of the data types that you talked about?
That's a question I like. As Tony said, Google Earth is an approach that I'm very keen on, or indeed actually different representations, 3D maps, different dynamic representations for data. We've used Google Earth as a medium for all kinds of market data. As far as I can see, it works for just about every data set that provides country-level information. So for the observatories, that means the country observatory, the industry observatory, the employment observatory, and the value-added observatory. It works as a way of getting meetings started. It's visually striking, it's easy to see the high-level comparisons and the trends across countries and the trends across years. In addition to, we use the color of a country to show the information, but you can get Google Earth to do things like raise the surface of a country by an amount proportional to its market size or the number of people in a particular type of occupation. I remember doing one analysis where I had to check growth figures in local currency against growth when translated to the currency used by headquarters. And in some cases, as I'm sure you can see, you get growth in one currency and decline in the other. But of course, for most countries, growth or decline is the same in both currencies. So I made a Google Earth version of the data where most countries were grey most of the time, i.e., it was either growth or decline. It's the same in both currencies. But if it was different, then the country changed, red for one way round, blue for the other. And what was striking about this was that these changes happened all over the world. I'm not sure we ever spotted a pattern. I mean, if we had, we'd probably be working in the foreign exchange markets. But it certainly helped make the point about how careful you have to be in communication between headquarters and individual country operations. To create the Google Earth views, you have to create the Google KML language from your data. This is not part of Cambashi's deliverables. We use free tools that are available on the web to translate spreadsheets with country data into KML, and we're absolutely happy to show licensees how to do this.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Here's a second question. This one's about using more than one data set. So if I can just read this. If I understand it correctly, it would be possible to use the employment data set and the industry data set together to look at things like average spend on applications per engineer or something like that. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right, and yes, that's a good way and a useful way of combining data sets. As I think I said, the Employment Observatory maps about 120 occupations and 112 industries, and these are the same 112 industries for which the Industry Observatory provides spending on technical applications. So, for example, what you can do is look at average spend per engineer, or you might be looking at a subtype of engineer. For example, in the AEC sector or subsectors for a particular set of countries, and you'd get a spend per engineer figure. So, if you did do that combination, you get you do get all sorts of ideas from the results. Maybe guidance on price points. But also you can see differences between countries, and actually there was one of exactly that sort of calculation that I did where there was really quite a substantial factor between the highest and the lowest on a spend per I think it was some professional engineer. And the thing is, while it doesn't necessarily answer the question, that sort of difference that you can find tends to pose really important questions, which for people planning a business, are really worth asking. So, if you did see that difference, you'd want to know why. Are the types of application being used fundamentally different? Is the pricing significantly different between the countries? Is it, that the price and volume curve is different for the two countries? I mean, it's possible that it may identify, more use of unlicensed software in one country than another. But to answer your question, yes, in principle, the technique that your question points to, combining data sets, this is a really powerful technique. And it's true not just for, Cambashi Observatory data, but if you put in your own data as well, then you're creating views that are truly unique to you. The only thing is you need a shared parameter, country, industry, or a year, or something, so that you can do the combination. And that really is making, if you do that, you're making, you're potentially making your version, your interpretation, your use of the market numbers into a source of competitive advantage. And that's really why we design the observatories as a platform and make them open to that sort of calculation. And combining data sets is definitely a good way to create the kind of special source in the numbers that is adding to your competitive advantage.
Thanks, Peter. Well, we're well over time, so let's just take one more. This one is asking, is it possible to conduct a target setting exercise at a lower level of granularity, for example, South America or emerging markets, or some such segmentation, rather than the high-level regional analysis that you took us through?
The answer is yes, but it's certainly possible, but it does involve rather more filtering and data filtering and merging than I went through today. So we saw the product observatory, which is for the countries, for the geographies, it works at an Americas, EMEA and APAC level. But of course, when I used the industry observatory, I had to aggregate country level information in order to get that regional view. So the easiest next step to country level targets would be to use the country level information from the industry observatory direct without aggregating into regions. Of course, the thing about that is it's for technical applications as a whole, not the smaller scope that we were looking at today to get something more specific to the market that Imaginary sells into. So if you use the country level and the whole of tech apps as for your target setting, you'd have to decide if that's good enough or if you've got resources really to do more analysis. The sort of techniques that you can use, or we can do for you, include things like grouping countries with similar industry and employment demographics, using industry level data by country to estimate product splits at a country level, that sort of thing. And if you did that, then you'd have the two growth figures we looked at, but at a country level. Now, I mean, you've got to know what you're doing with those calculations. I mean, you can be sure that they're done in a systematic way, but each calculation step, in effect, multiplies any error in the sources that it's based from. So you usually want some independent data to calibrate the results that you get from that sort of calculation. It doesn't need to be complete data, it's just some data points for validation. And it may be that your own company's results by country could be sufficient to allow for that sort of calibration. So to answer the question, the answer is yes, the target setting exercise can be done at a lower level of at a country level rather than a regional level, but it needs extra work, and it needs the kind of work that you've got to take care with the data.
Thanks, Peter. Well, we're 10 minutes over, so I think we probably should bring the session to a close there. As I said earlier, we'll respond to the remaining questions by email. Once again, many thanks to everyone for joining us today. I hope that you found the session useful and that you'll join us for the next webinar when we'll be looking at the use of market data to support another marketing planning scenario. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.